Hello everyone, Fox here, and Undead Labs recently had a stream where they brought in a guy named Steve who is a lot more qualified to talk about the ins and outs, about the possibility of why rain can or could not be implemented into State of Decay 2, and he did answer that question, so we are going to go ahead and do a reaction video. This was going to be a lot shorter because most of the stream was not really relevant to the future of State of Decay 2, but the quotes I want to start with are video games that the Undead Labs team really enjoy because that is actually relevant to State of Decay 2.
Because eventually I have to move, I have to play lots and lots of games to do this job, right? And so, like, if I want to see the next game, I have to get through the first one. And that means sometimes I need to lower the difficulty just to let the pressure off.
Yeah, typically the only games that I have taken like all the way to the max, there was Civ, obviously, and that kind of goes to my wheelhouse anyway. And then XCOM and Iron Man mode.
Oh wow!
Up until a tragic.
And he asks, do you have a favorite game based on Roman history? Is it just Civilization or?
I'm a big fan of the Total War games.
Me too.
Yes, I love those. I particularly I have to say my favorite though was Rome 2.
Civilization, XCOM on Iron Man mode on top of that, and Rome, Total War, just Total War in general. These are really complicated games. The reason I find this relevant is because Undead Labs should be able to understand what is missing from State of Decay by playing these games. Now, State of Decay is never going to have the complexity of something like XCOM or Total War or Civ, but they should understand what those games thrive on because they are simulators. All three of those games are different types of simulators. And what makes all of those games really enjoyable is that all of them are quite difficult, they're very complicated, and they give you a whole bunch of tools to find your own way to overcome the simulation. That is the main thing that is lacking in State of Decay 2. It doesn't have enough complexity, it doesn't have enough difficulty, not in the form of just adding more zombies in. It doesn't have enough mechanical and environmental complexity that is attempting to stop you from succeeding at the simulation. And the things that they add into the game, like the critical response and the World War II weapons, none of those are useful and meaningful additions to the game that help you interact with the simulation in a really interesting way. None of them deepen your connection to the simulation like Civilization does with one of their expansion packs, or like XCOM does when they do one of their major expansions like in XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. Now, yes, those are often paid DLCs, but I believe people would be willing to pay for DLC if it actually adds interesting, complex, new things that require you to sit down and think about how you're going to deal with them. Let's go ahead and move on, though, to their statements on dynamic weather and wet textures.
Desmond Bailey wants to know, what technical hurdles would adding dynamic weather to State of Decay 2 pose for your team? This is a question we get all the time. Like, can we add weather? And the answer is always, talk to Steve.
Okay, so look at what's on screen here, right? So pretend it's raining outside. It's actually really easy. For a while, we actually had dynamic weather running during the State of Decay 2 dev process. We didn't intend to ship it, but we were testing it. And so like drawing the little rain sprites that make it look like it's raining and, turning the lights down, having more clouds in the sky, we actually can do all of that. Where it gets really tricky is if Brent will hide the UI for just a sec, right? It's going to be raining out there, not in here. That's hard enough. It's actually surprisingly difficult. And then what makes it particularly tricky for a game like State of Decay, this house has a pitched roof. And so like we can say, oh, well, we'll just turn the rain off, around the footprint of the house. Well, you'd walk outside and you would see the rain
stopping just above the roof.
Top of the roof, right? Or I mean, you might.
Because it's easier to do things in cubes than to do them in
exactly.
like random form-hugging shapes.
Right. You do that, and then you get weird, crazy things like, should it rain under a tree? If not, like, does it have to line up really closely with the visible appearance of the tree? And you have to have all of that data so what part of what I can see is potentially rainable on. You have to have all of that all the time, even when you're not using it. So it's not it's not like it's an unknown problem. It's just a problem that has significant costs.
We've made good
and
progress. I think they'll
with a
give us
big
better
open world
prices
game like
in the
this, we
future.
always have to be really careful
is the
about
key
taking
to our
those
survival.
kind of costs on.
I imagine also like the shaders and textures and stuff outside would have to like have what they look like wet and what they look like dry,
Right.
Which might be a lot of
Yeah,
art
exactly.
creation
And you know, so there's probably
audio,
There's
too.
probably 8 to 10,000 core shaders in the game, right? So we just all of a sudden we'd have 16 to 20,000, right? And that those aren't super expensive just by existing, but they do cost something, right?
So here we are, Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, to prove a point. Let's listen. This is one of the most popular games ever created, and it conveniently happens to be raining in my save. Now they've got the basic elements of what you need for rain. You got the rain falling down, overcast skies, they have a flash of light for lightning, and you heard the rolling thunder. They've got the sound of rain falling. But you know what they don't have? Let's look straight down. Wet textures. Forget the wet textures, they also don't have rain splashing on the ground. The droplets just disappear. They don't have it. This cobblestone path doesn't have it.
With an old woman, hmm?
No one's talking to you.
For the day.
No one's talking to you. This stone doesn't need it. This barrel doesn't need it. This log doesn't need it. These rocks don't need it. None of these things need wet textures. You have to be, like, I think it was Jeffrey who said, oh, well, we'd have to, like, double the textures and we'd have, like, a bajillion textures, wet and dry. Here, you've got Elder Scrolls Skyrim, one of the most popular games ever made. It doesn't need a bajillion textures due to, like, wet and dry. Probably has a bajillion textures because it's Skyrim. But they didn't need to double their textures for wet and dry. Let's go outside. So here we are, Gates of Whiterun. You know what else this game doesn't have? Unique sound effects for rain hitting different types of surfaces. Doesn't matter that this is wood. Doesn't matter that this is stone. The rain doesn't change sounds in Skyrim. Yes, it would be different in real life, but they understood that 80% of rain immersion is just these simple effects. Droplets, overcast, lightning, thunder, the sound of rain, some fog in the distance. That's what gets the job done. So when they're talking about, oh, well, we'd have to double our textures, that's crap. If Skyrim doesn't need wet textures, State of Decay 2 doesn't need wet textures. When their product manages, oh, but then we'd have to, like, re-record a bunch of sounds for water striking various surfaces.
I actually asked our audio team, like, hey, what if we just added, like, rain? And the audio team was like, okay, do you want to pay us to re-record every single sound as wet? And then you want to spend all the memory to load all the wet sounds and then transition to wet to dry? And I was like, maybe? Can we cost it out?
Can we cost it out?
If Skyrim doesn't need that, State of Decay 2 doesn't need that. Now you might say, well, isn't Skyrim an older game? It's a last-gen game. It's a 7th-gen game. That is true. It is a last-gen game, but in 2006, Gears of War 1 had wet textures. So the technology is obviously there. It just wasn't needed to get the effect to look convincing and add a lot of mood and feel into Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. And if it's good for Skyrim, I assure you, it's going to be good for State of Decay 2. Now, I'm not doubting Steve when he says that there's probably some complexities in the game's geometry, and maybe they need to have a monetary incentive. Then add it into a DLC. Release a playable map, add in rain, and then add in some kind of mechanic associated with rain. Add in some kind of, like, I don't know, the rain boogeyman who comes out only when it's raining, and if you kill him, you get a unique item. So you add in a new enemy, the new map, you add in rain, and then you can charge money for it, because then people will say, oh, you know what, you put a lot of work into it, so I get it. We'll pay a few bucks for it. But my bottom line here, my main point is that if this is good enough for Skyrim, and I think it's convincing, it's sufficiently convincing, then it's good enough for State of Decay 2. And as a result of that, I would say, when they are piling on these things, Like, oh no, it'll double our textures, or oh no, we'll have to re-record sounds on different surfaces, textures wet and dry. No, that's garbage. Those are excuses. And now you've seen it yourself. Skyrim. Beautiful game. Doesn't need wet textures. Doesn't need unique sound effects for rain striking different types of surfaces. And neither does it need to be in State of Decay 2. If this is good enough in Skyrim, it's good enough in State of Decay 2. At any rate, that is my reaction to their response on the stream. Let me know what you think down in the comment sections. But until next time, like this video if it was informative, subscribe for future State of Decay 2 content, and of course remember that you don't have to be good to get good.